You are now listening to the Project Kuwait. Where we stop at nothing to bring you the right facts on health, fitness, and psychology. Featuring some of the world's most experienced professionals. So you can learn, live, and live. With your hosts, Meg, Dr. D, and Mehdi.
The US has a very dynamic economy. It's not similar to the one in Europe or the Middle East. The laws here are quite flexible. The market, even the labor market, is driven by supply and demand. I mean, when you look at China and you look at the US, there's so much interdependence. We rely on each other for so much in terms of goods and services. China is the biggest buyer of US goods. So we keep bashing China, but they buy more goods and services from the US than anyone else. And millions of US jobs that depend on the Chinese consumers. I think behind the scenes, they both know that the biggest threat is the US, and the biggest threat is shale oil from the US that has been increasing dramatically. It has been taken over global markets, and that shale companies are over leveraged, and that they cannot withstand a price war like Saudi Arabia or Russia. And I think you will see maybe very soon a rearrangement of the key players in this industry, with Saudi Arabia and its OPEC partners and Russia coming out on top.
Wow, that's an interesting take. That's a very interesting take.
All this and more in today's episode.
So nice to see you. It's been a while. It's been what, 8 years? It's amazing how time flies. But I'm glad to be joining you. I watched and I listened actually to some of the podcasts. Very interesting discussions. Glad to be on this one. Let's see. My name is Mourad Dakhli. I'm a professor of international business. I focus on international trade, international investment, cross-cultural management. But if you took my classes at the American University of Kuwait, you know that they give you a book and you teach. And it could be anything. So from labor economics to research methods to marketing to management, you name it. So, which was great, by the way. It's challenging, but I did enjoy that. I also now serve as director of the Master of International Business. This is our flagship international business program. We have people from at least now 16 countries, any given cohort. And it's a lockstep, a one-year program. We have been ranked recently as one of the top 20 programs, so we're very happy with that. And I continue doing research. My research focuses on human capital and social capital, but I'm also working actively over the past, 10 years or so in the area of teaching and learning, international education and what have you. And as a matter of fact, I publish articles with former AUK students, and I publish articles with my colleague, Julian sitting there.
That's right. I miss you as a researcher. Since you've left, I haven't really had a good partner, to be honest.
You know what? I miss working with you too. It was great to kind of sit there and just squeeze those brain cells and come up with these crazy ideas.
I love the way you used to organize the team and with our students. It was amazing. We have published some really nice articles.
Yes, we have. So I'm very proud of that. And why not? I mean, we can get back, everything is moving virtual. So maybe we can move some of our research virtual.
We should actually, definitely. I will be.
That's pretty cool. So Dr. Mourad, you had some questions for Dr. D and myself in regards to Kuwait during this hectic time. So shoot, go ahead.
Yes, I'm really curious because I would like to know how you guys are dealing with this pandemic, how former students and students at AUK and other universities and K through 12, how our parents dealing with this. So I'd like to get a feel of how things are going in Kuwait.
Well, I mean, I'll speak about the university aspect, and then obviously, you know that we've never really had online learning and we've never really been trained. The Ministry of Education here are very strict about e-learning because they don't believe that really is the same learning as face-to-face. So right now, AUK and all the private universities and actually all the private schools, including our kids' school, AUS, they are not approved to do online learning. Granted that, our president, Dr. Rauda, is trying to get us all trained on WebEx, which, I'm trying, but we're not supposed to teach any new material. We can only teach old material because teaching new material will break the law of the minister saying. So right now they're in not dispute, but they're in discussion with the minister to see if he would allow Recently, the law is that we delay the school until August. August, the seniors, not in the university, but schools in general, August will be for seniors, because now that seniors cannot graduate. And it's not like America where you guys close school one day and the next day your kids or you moved online. We have been doing like micro learning like the kids have, or e-learning, but they're not counted toward their grade, which means that the grade year has to be extended for like all grade 1 to 12. And then their school, their new year will start in December. So like Larson, like Skender, that he will be 10th grade in December, not like Skender where he can finish the year in May, even online. We're not like that because the minister hasn't approved that. But they do give them 2 hours or 3 hours of things just to keep their brain functioning. AUK is the same way. AUK is on a stop right now. We cannot do anything until August. August, we go back to school and finish up the spring semester. Or unless somebody changes the mind of the minister or the Ministry of Education, having them be convinced that this is learning. And if he does do that, then we would go online and start finishing everyone. But the seniors, they cannot graduate till December now, or end of November. December will start the new year. There will be a fall semester then. So now they're trying to work on the calendar. But this is the difficulty with So although we were saying earlier that Ministry of Health is so organized, Ministry of Education is still working on how to work on this and how do we really get the kids to be finishing. So
that's tough. I think even with the move online, I mean, the infrastructure is there obviously here. But one thing, I was talking to my own cohort, the Master of International Business, and some other students. I think the one piece that hurts the most is not being able to take part in the commencement ceremonies. And that's a very big deal here in the US, probably more so than many other places. And that's the highlight of your 4-year bachelor or 2-year master's, what have you. Families are involved and friends are involved. And it's a big celebration of achievements. And I think moving online has not been as big of a challenge as canceling really these type of events. And of course, sports are big here as far as the industry, as far as collegiate. March Madness is such a big thing. So that also has been probably has more of an effect. Of course, moving online is big, but here just going to add additional points that make the situation more complicated.
That's true.
Yeah.
So, I mean, everything is at a stop, which, brings us back economically. What does that really mean? Of course, I mean, the milestone for these students are graduating, and what does that mean for high schoolers, all this, but also now the whole world have stopped and now no work, nobody's doing anything.
Oh, yeah, and that's nerve-wracking. I was chatting with some of my students because just a few weeks ago, things looked very rosy here in the US. We were on a winning streak for almost a decade now. Things are going very well, and this started with the previous administration, obviously, during the Obama years. And that continued with the Trump years. So things looked very, very good. And now you have all these graduates, and even we have interviews that were canceled. And we have job fair. That's how we place our students. We do these job fairs, and we have these likes of Coca-Cola and UPS and Delta and others who come in and recruit. And now all of those events are canceled. So that's probably going to be very tough for new graduates, those who even make it past education. And now they're left with, I think, really a lot of uncertainty as far as what are they going to do once they receive their degrees right now.
So we'll stick with that point. I think that's a really great point. And so far, I think a lot of economists that have come out and said that 1/4 of Americans will be unemployed by the time this is all over, if not more. And when you talk about these new fresh graduates coming out with, the great ideas, especially because, let's be realistic, it's the young guns who come in and they have these great ideas and they sort of innovate the markets. How do you think that's going to affect innovation over the next few years?
That's a very good question. I think one has to put things in context. The US has a very dynamic economy. It's not similar to the one in Europe or the Middle East. The laws here are quite flexible. The market, even the labor market, is driven by supply and demand, more so than others. So even when you look at those numbers, 20%. Now, those numbers in France and Germany will be scary, obviously. I think there's so much dynamism in the economy. Unemployment rate was below 3%, which means it's full employment. I mean, if you want a job, you get it. There are those who just are not interested, obviously. So I think we have to put things in context. It's true that's 20% unemployment or close to it, but a lot of these are seasonal jobs with retailers, Uber drivers, who just were out of job and are then jump back in line looking for jobs. And that's how they are counted into the unemployment figure. Having said that, there are a lot of opportunities still, even in the worst of times. Amazon is hiring 100,000 people. Walmart is hiring. Target is hiring. So there are some bright spots here and there. It's not enough to make up for the loss, obviously. But I think the figures have to be kind of put in the right context. In an economy like this one, as soon, I believe, as the pandemic is under control, I'm not sure if it's going to be fixed or cured or what have you, but I think once the pandemic is under control, similar to what's happening in China today, I think you're going to see a pretty strong rebound because companies are going to need that human capital back to jump on track. And you will see a spike in employment. And I think that's driven by also the flexible nature of this market. And catching up will be much faster than what you can see in Europe or other places.
So how would you compare this to the global crisis in 2008 when we saw, as they say, if America sneezes, the entire world catches a cold. So how would you compare this to 2008, the financial crisis then? It seems like this is going to be a lot worse than what we saw with the drop in the Dow Jones.
Yeah, good question too. Also, I think I want to kind of qualify the statement you said when America actually called the whole world. I think let's say when America and China, because now really we're talking about more of a bipolar, at least economic.
By the way, I'm pretty sure I picked that up from your class, 12 years ago or something. I'm pretty sure you
how much
said
I
that.
talked about China.
Yep, you did.
Remember how much I talked about China. So now really we're living in by kind of two leaders, economically speaking, China and the US. And China, by the way, has surpassed the US in purchasing power parity figures, not in real term, but in purchasing power. China is still the biggest exporter on the planet. It is the biggest buyer of cars and goods and services, biggest buyer of energy on the planet. So I think when you look at 2008, that was really specific to an industry. And I think that changed. There was a bubble. That's more of a sector-driven and a financial crisis. This is not really a financial crisis. I think it's much more serious. This is not specific to, let's say, the tech sector. This is not specific to the banks. This is really more of a supply and demand crisis. You have people who cannot go to work. You have companies that cannot produce. And that's the backbone of a real economy. It is not just about stocks going up or going down. It is not about hedging or betting or playing the lottery with the stock market. I think this is much more real than what we've seen before. It's fundamentally economies are at stop or standstill. You have here, for example, in Atlanta, Georgia, or in Georgia, Kia, which makes cars, the Korean car companies just had to close down because of supply chain issues and supply chain disruptions. So you have supply chain disruptions, you have companies closing down, you have restaurants without customers, you have the backbone of any economy are small businesses. We think about Walmart and we talk about Amazon and we talk about all of these M&Es, multinational enterprises. But at the end of the day, over 90% of any economy are SMEs, small and medium enterprises. And those are the ones that are getting really hit, and they are getting hit hard. I mean, we're talking about the salons, we're talking about the restaurants, we're talking about the service providers and landscapers and real estate agents. And as I talk to my friends and people around me, it's much more real than 2008. I am not trying to kind of downplay that. Obviously, that was a big issue and a lot of people lost a lot of money. I'm not looking at my 401k or 403b right now. I don't even want to see
it. It is bad.
I am not looking. I am not checking. I said I'm going to ignore it. So all of us are affected and are affected in a real way, and especially my colleagues who are retiring right now. So you are retiring and cashing in your 401 or 403b at a horrible time when the stock market has going to collapse, 28%, 30%. So I don't want to minimize that side of it, but I think for this specific crisis, it's much more real. It's about small businesses being hit. It's about people being able to go to work. It's about companies not being able to produce. And I think you will see the effect much more long-term and lasting, even though obviously everything is up in the air and depends on how fast this whole pandemic comes under control.
So how would you compare that to the previous drops in the market? And, I threw this in the questions earlier. And when I looked at everything and I looked at the data from 1901 to the 1987 Black Monday, I looked at all of that data and I was like, how would you compare this? Because you're probably one of the smartest economics professors that I've ever come across.
No. There are a lot of smart. I'm an IB professor.
You're a realist. You're a realist.
I read econ papers. No,
you're a realist.
I'm realist. Yeah, I'm more business. Yeah, I am more business than economics. Yeah.
How would you compare that? Because we do head in that direction, and it looks like we are. Do you think we could have a Great Depression where the American market is, just totally blundered, and which will affect the entire world, except for some of the markets like Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and some of the smaller countries, but eventually it will?
Yeah, that's also a good question. And there are a lot of discussion going on. There are a lot of articles, I'm sure you read some of these, that are trying to compare what's happening today as far as the drop in the market. It's a different world right now. It's when you look at 1929 and 2000, it's much more global, much more integrated, much more interconnected. So anything that happens in Japan, anything that happens in China, anything that happens in the US will have an effect. And because of that, I think adds a lot more complexity. It used to be at one point the US was 30% of the world economy, and the US was much more kind of inward looking. Now we're looking at companies that outsource all over the place. Most of the goods, I mean, if you walk into Walmart here, you see shelves and shelves of made in China, made in Vietnam, made in Thailand and what have you. So I think when you try to compare what's happening in the stock market today or in the financial sector, you really have to put this in the context of we are living in a different world right now. And this world is much more integrated, much more interconnected, and much more global. First of all, on the negative side, we've seen this happen even before the coronavirus. If you have tariffs on China, which obviously the US has imposed on slew of goods coming from China, then companies are struggling because they outsource in China. And when their cost of production becomes high, then they are struggling trying to find alternate places. One of my students was a purchasing agent for Pier 1. Pier 1 is a furniture, high-end kind of furniture retail. Well, it's not easy because these relationships are built over years and years with Chinese suppliers. So now you need to jump and go to Indonesia or Vietnam to find the right supplier. And that's not easy. And this is kind of just one example of how interconnected things are. So some of these companies got hit hard because of their supply chain. And I think it's more so now. Having said that, you could also look at the positive side. So if one economy goes down, maybe another economy can help. So think of it as a portfolio effect, which means that any loss in one stock will be mitigated by gains in another stock. So globalization creates its contagion, obviously. Things spread fast. Crises go fast. But now, as we see things kind of improving, and I hope this lasts in China. I was reading this morning that even in Wuhan, people are getting back to work slowly. So, I mean, that's great news. This is the epicenter of the pandemic. So portfolio effect is that companies that can have businesses that are tied to other places or have a robust network, can manufacture in other places, and have that kind of flexibility built into their system, I think will fare well. So I think it's I'm not a stock market expert, I'm not a finance expert, but on the economic side, I think it's different. And I think it's all driven by the degree of integration between different economies that helps on some level, but also kind of creates additional risk, especially on the contagion side when it comes to international business.
Dr. D, you'll like this question. So, Dr. Mourad, do you think that there is a conspiracy going on so that the Chinese created this virus in order to buy up American
Not
stocks?
Chinese, the Americans created the virus.
I would believe the Chinese created it to buy up American stocks, to be honest with you.
No, that's not that conspiracy.
I heard both.
Mahdi, not my conspiracy, my patients. They tell me this conspiracy that the Americans created a virus, and when they went to the Olympic, I don't know where they went to China, the military, they injected it in humans, and so they can create this chaos, and ultimately Trump will win the election because election will be canceled.
You know what, guys? I heard both conspiracies. I heard it's the Chinese. I think it's the conspiracy between the US and China. Both of them. I know.
Because they hate each other.
Yeah. Well, honestly, whenever you have these type of massive kind of earth-shattering events like this one, I mean, this is out of nowhere. This is a deconstructive event that will have a long-term effect on the economy, on the political system, on cultures, even on the way we interact with each other, the way we greet each other. I mean, everything is being deconstructed as we speak. whenever you have these kind of unusual events, whenever people feel like they have such a loss of control, and Dr. D can speak to this much better than I can, they try to attribute these things to these wild stories. They make for fun readings. I think the most widely circulated conspiracy theory is, in fact, the visit to Wuhan by a group of military. They mentioned that the US administration pulled the CDC representative in China just a couple of months before this happened. And so I think it's just that. I mean, when you look at China and you look at the US, there's so much interdependence. We rely on each other for so much in terms of goods and services. China is the biggest buyer of US goods. So we keep bashing China, but they buy more goods and services from the US than anyone else. And millions of US jobs that depend on the Chinese consumers. So to think that a country will engage in this type of malicious terrorism, really, that's what I think is not reasonable. They make for fun readings. Maybe people will find some type of attribution because they ran out of excuses or explanation, or it's beyond their control. But I don't believe in this.
Well, I think psychologically, I think a lot of times we look for answers to decrease our anxiety. So when you've got high anxiety and high stress, people kind of scramble around to get something that's tangible that will make you feel better. So if we think of it as a conspiracy theory, it gives us some sort of control when we're anxious. Therefore, because if we think about this virus as no cure, we don't know where it's coming from. There's so many unpredictability, and people that are suffering from anxiety will have more anxiety because we unpredictable. So, it's the same thing as like someone when they die. And to this day, I remember like my old trainer, her daughter died out of nowhere. And I remember how she was like scrambling for information. I mean, they just said she died. There was something wrong with her, but nothing specific. All the lab reported, because everyone is looking for some answers to hold on to it, because it makes grief easier. It makes anxiety easier. It makes us. So because if I say it's a conspiracy theory, then I know it's controllable, that whoever implanted it can replant it, implant it, whatever, right?
Yeah, so, it makes sense. Makes sense.
Dr. Mourad, I have a quick question for you. Now, I'm sure you've read the book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. All right. I read that years and years ago. And yesterday I was talking to my wife about it. And I was like, you know what? This is why when Dr. Dinka wanted to talk about it as a conspiracy, or her patients were talking about it, and after we had the discussion with Ali Sharara, I was like, you know what? Now it kind of makes sense. Like, you're not so much of a quack if you kind of believe it after reading the book, Economic Hitman, and when I thought back to it. So do you think it could have been orchestrated? Is it possible?
Is it possible?
You're actually saying it's okay for me to have conspiracy? Wow, Magdi, thank you.
Well, you know what? I think what I would say is an interesting point is that economics is linked to psychology. I mean, and we know it. It's not something new. Herding effects, buying stocks. I mean, if Warren Buffett came on TV tomorrow and said, I'm dumping all Coca-Cola stocks, without reading, without knowing anything, this Coca-Cola could be doing great. But you know what? It's psychology effect. You see things going down, and that whole momentum buying and momentum selling and all that. So we know for a fact that economics factors are linked to psychology, but also political factors. And I don't want to bring politics in it, but leadership, the type of messages they give constituents. So at the end of the day, psychology, politics, economics are so much intertwined that even in the context of creating or believe in conspiracy theories, or creating even conspiracy theories and sending it out there, it will have an economic impact. And I think sometimes you see it happening on the stock market, but you could also see it happening for real companies. I know it happened before here, where rumors or malicious rumors were spread about companies, and their stocks suffered. And there was a very good case many years ago in Egypt. Salisbury, one of the reasons why they left the country is because there was this rumor about them doing business with Israel or sending money to the country. Well, that's all you have to say in the Middle East. Just claim that somebody is donating money to Israel or what have you, and the company could suffer. So there's all of these political issues with psychology issues that are at interplay. Where does psychology end and economics starts and what have you? But we know that it is true. And I think even our daily discussions, can have economic implications, and they are driven by economic implication and it's based on our psychology.
That's probably the reason why you and I we co-authored a lot of research because you're right. I think psychology and there's a lot of theory that you used in your economic theory that it really applies to social psychology, for example.
Absolutely. Yes.
Definitely.
Yes.
And the way you play with people's mind, like I said, just saying it's a conspiracy, this is what's going to happen to the economy, it will come up. You give them some sense of hope, then people start to feel much better about this. So if I say to people, no, this is great, I'm glad we're doing this because pretty soon in 6 months, our stocks will jack up and, Trump is going to make sure everything is going to be fine because he wants to win the vote. Everyone is in good mood.
Absolutely. And it's amazing. And we are living that right now. I mean, everyone is watching the briefings and some say they have turned into propaganda and some say that's what they need. They want to hear positive messages. So, but it's psychology is such a big part of how we deal with these things, and it will affect how fast we get out of this.
So speaking of that, going to the psychological factor, the two senators that they proclaimed that they pinned out as, selling all of their stocks off before, the 12% drop that we saw the 16th of March, which was, I think, one of the biggest drops we've seen in the last 10 years. Do you think we'll bounce back from that, or do you think we're going to get hit harder in the coming days or the coming weeks?
By the way, one of the senators is our own here from Georgia, Dakhli. She was handpicked by our governor, Kemp, but she was not Trump's favorite, by the way. Anyway, she's a businesswoman. She has always been a successful businesswoman, her and her husband. I think, honestly, it's questionable, and it's really sad, talking about that specific point there, when you have people in power and people who have access to information are supposed to act on that information for the benefit of their constituents and for the benefit of the country, benefiting from that information for their own good, for their own pockets. I found it iffy and questionable and hard to justify how you sell so much stock the day after you have a briefings about the real situation. Corona. Before they went out to the public and shared the information that this is going to be tough, that this is going to have economic effect, that this is going to affect the stock market probably. These two have gone out there. Actually, not there's two. I think there are more, at least four right now. I think that kind of raised eyebrows. And I do hope there are investigations underway, because if that is the case, they should pay for it. You are voted into office to act on behalf of the people who voted for you, not on behalf of your own companies and businesses. Having said that, again, what was the question? I forgot.
Well, you answered the first part. The second part was we saw a 12% drop of the stock market on the 16th of March. I haven't really checked it today, to be honest with you, but that's been the largest drop we've seen so far. Do you foresee a bigger dip another day with a 14 or a 15% drop in the coming days or weeks or months? When do you think it's going to get really bad?
Well, also remember yesterday we had the biggest jump in the stock market ever recorded in history. So I think it was about 12 or 15% jump. So I think the idea of what makes everyone nervous is the ups and downs. There's no stability. So I think the focus is not whether it went up today and down yesterday. I think it's the fact that it's so volatile that goes up in record numbers and comes down in record numbers. And that is really kind of nerve-wracking for many people who live off of the stock market and are following the stock market. Do I believe? Honestly, I'm not sure. I think there are experts who will probably be better at this. But having said that, I follow experts, and there are those who say we are in for a rough ride and that we have not seen the beginning of it, that we are at the early stage, and that we should be ready for a bigger dip. Just because if you follow what happened in China and Italy, and then you map the US trend against these countries, then you see that we are at the early stages of it. That means that things are going to get tougher before they improve. Those who kind of prescribe to that point of view feel that, yes, there will be tougher days to come. Others say that because of the stimulus package, and if you follow the news today, we heard that it has been approved, $2 trillion. It sounds like a massive number, but this is a massive economy, obviously. And the key is, where is that money going? And we can talk about that in a second. But those who are much more upbeat about the stimulus, about the ability of this country to kind of catch up and make it past the dip caused by the coronavirus, I think are much more upbeat and feel that we have seen the worst of it. My personal opinion, I think, is going to be bumpy. I don't think we have seen the worst of it yet. That's my personal opinion, just based on my readings of the financial market experts. I think the argument of basing what's happening in the US and mapping the trend against what's happening in China than in Europe is more reasonable to me than what people expect in terms of the effect of the stimulus plan.
So, I mean, let's talk about that 2 trillion today. I did read that they passed this stimulus package, and they were saying it's going to go to like big companies, small companies, small businesses that they're going to try to save. Here in Kuwait, they just had yesterday or 2 days ago that they were going to give people, small businesses, big businesses, they're going to give them 6 months off of paying their loans without any interest.
And individuals also.
Individual Kuwaitis, not said. But as far as businesses, doesn't have to be, I guess most of them are Kuwaiti owned, but the small businesses, big businesses, and individuals, Kuwaitis, they're going to get 6 months off without paying they're going to delay their loan payments and also their credit card. So in a way, I mean, that's our stimulus package so far. I'm sure here the country is going to try to help the economy very fast so that way people can't be as stressed as they are now because, no one's working. People are going to lose their jobs. Some people already gotten laid off. You said earlier, the people that get hit the most are like the waitresses and the
self-employed.
And all of those people are going to lose their job or they're expats, so they probably have to leave the country. What was so the stimulus package, do you really think this is gonna, and he's saying within the 6 months it should really save the economy, so I don't know.
I mean, that's out there. I mean, there's so many. Honestly, I was trying to read about it. The details are not out yet. As of right before we got on the area on this podcast, I was trying to catch up on what's happening and I was trying to read about it. Now they say that there will be $1,200 for individuals who make below, I believe, 75. There are $2,400 for couples who make below 150.
That's what I was reading.
Then I read that there is also allowances for children, $500 per child. There is also for small businesses, an allowance for small businesses, for the self-employed, and also a lot of money for big companies. I mean, frankly, if you look at the tourism sector, it's decimated. I mean, it's gone. Some of these hotels and some of these airlines saw a 90% drop in their business. So I mean, that's drastic. So that's what I was able to read. But as far as how that's going to be distributed, when is it going to be distributed, what kind of strings, because these things are usually given with some strings attached. Is that going to be counted as an income for your next tax, which means the value is actually less than that? Are we going to receive the check in the mail this week, next week, May? I heard that May will be the soonest we can hope for the checks to be mailed. So there are so many variables out there as far as the stimulus package. Having said that, I will hate, and many will hate, to see another package that gives so much money to big corporations so that they can buy their stocks back, beef up the stock on stock options, and not put it back into the economy. We've seen that happen with the last bailout, and we don't want that. So there is really legitimate reasons. I mean, everybody was mad about this taking time, but I am so glad that there was a push to make sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes again. And I have not seen what kind of strings are attached, to be honest with you. But I know there's one of the main ones is to make sure that if you give money to companies, they put it back into growth, into economy, into their employees, into their businesses, and not into buying back their own stock or raising their own salaries, So there's a lot of variables out there. And I think the stimulus will help. It's quite a lot of money. But think of this person who receives a check of $1,200 now, okay? Think of the self-employed who was making, let's say, $10,000 a month, whether they're working for Uber or whether they're working for restaurants or whether they're working for, landscaping, what have you. I mean, in the scheme of things, as massive as $2 trillion does sound, how much is that going to do to a person like that? This is a demand-based economy, which means that to the degree that people are going outside and buying things, our economy is fine, right? So over 2/3 of the GDP in this country, in the US, is based on consumption. So you might give money to companies, you might give money to businesses, but if the consumers are not out there buying, if they're not confident in what's going to happen, if the money does not adequately make up for the money lost, I don't think it's going to have a long-term effect at all. I think you're going to see a bump. People are going to be happy. You have some extra cash in your pocket, but it is not anywhere near making up for the real income that consumers were making, and especially disposable income that was available that people could spend on discretionary spending, like movie theaters and cars and upgrading their phones and everything else. So there's a lot of talk about the stimulus package. It will have a small effect. It will have a short-term effect. But in the scheme of things, given the size of this economy, given the size of the consumption portion of the GDP, I think we're overstating the effect of the package.
With disposable income, and I think this would affect someone like Dr. D, you're a psychologist, so you make an hourly wage by people choosing to, afford your services, personal trainers, these people. What's going to happen to them? Because disposable income, all of a sudden money's tight. I'm holding on to my money. What's the first thing I'm going to cut out? I'm going to cut out my sessions with Dr. D. I'm going to cut out my sessions with my personal trainer. I'm going to cut out those things. So what is that going to do to their market, and how bad is it going to affect, let's say, Dr. D, your trade's a little different because you're a psychologist, but like personal trainers and, the guy that works landscaping, so to speak, what's that going to do to them? Like, they're essentially unemployed after that. Do you think they'll have a bounce back? When will their bounce back be?
For us, is they closed the clinics, all the private clinics, Mourad. Just on Sunday, Saturday, I'm ready to go. Sunday, Saturday night, we get a call and they're like, all the patients are canceled. The psychiatrists, we depend on the medication. Everything's closed. All the private clinics, plastic surgeries, ENT, whatever you call it. Labs are all closed. Everything. The only thing is open right now is public hospitals and private hospitals. And if there are clinics connected to the private hospitals. For the private hospitals, I have a friend who works at one of the hospitals here. She's saying that they're already thinking of two things, the choices that they told them today. You either take your annual leave without pay, or we will not be able, we let you go. Because even private hospitals here are losing money. So can you imagine? Yeah, so going back to Med.
Yeah, and that's really what he's talking about, the spending, the disposable income that's driving the economy. When you start things people cut, and for us now, it's very common for people in Georgia and
spring break.
Yeah, exactly. We go to Florida. That's what we have been doing. And you rent a house on the beach and you spend a week there or so. All of those houses are empty now, and so when you start talking about disposable income basically disappearing, then you're talking about all of these service providers really taking a big hit, and it's very hard to recover from these. And I'm not sure what type of stimulus plan will keep them afloat, and for how long. This lasts longer. It's very hard to imagine that the small sandwich shop or coffee shops or small travel agent or real estate agent or landscaper will be able to withstand. These guys live on, many of them, a paycheck anyway, as you say in the US. So it's going to be very tough. It's going to be very tough.
So I got my last geek out question. As you can see, I'm definitely one of your students, Dr. Mourad.
Good job.
What about the hidden oil war that's going on that nobody's talking about right now between Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the United States? No one's talking about this. It's kind of taking a back seat. And in reality,
I'm glad you. Yeah. I'm sorry. Can you repeat the end of that question? I think I missed the last part.
But in reality, that's a big situation that's going on.
I see. That's very interesting because remember, we were going through the oil market before everything blew out. But keep in mind, though, the oil market crisis was also driven by the corona crisis, because when things started in China and China was starting to shut down, with China being one of the biggest consumers of oil prices started to go down, right? And there are multiple players in this equation. You have the Saudi Arabia is one, Russia is the other, the U.S. shale industry, the fracking and all of that shit industry, that has been very successful. And actually, the U.S. has pretty much become overnight a big oil player, and the number one oil producer because of shale oil. Now, things were bad for the oil industry before this whole lockdown and everything else. Saudi Arabia decided they are not going to play nice, and they are going to open up the spigots and let the oil flow. The number one loser in this case, by the way, is not Russia. Russia is resource rich. It's an industrialized country. And they can withstand this. I think the industry that has been the most hit by this is the shale industry, because these guys in Oklahoma and Texas are working on debt. They borrow so much money. And even though they were receiving advice, I remember a few years ago, everyone was saying, you better watch out. Don't leverage yourself too much because things might change. But they were so bullish on shale oil that they started borrowing money, and banks started giving them money. So now they're unable to pay back their debt. And many of them are going out of business. So it's already, a few of them are already out of business. When the cost of producing oil is 20, 25, you can't sell oil below cost. So, and banks are not going to loan you. Daily operations are based on loans. So that's an interesting equation there. I think obviously the low oil prices will hurt countries like Kuwait and like Saudi Arabia and like Abu Dhabi and other players. But I think the oil market now is being jittery. Russia does not want to play by the OPEC plus. OPEC plus is the group, includes all OPEC members plus Russia, kind of working in tandem there, trying to control prices. Now, I have my own conspiracy theory there, so not to spread, but I think the whole discussion about the conflict between Saudi Arabia and Russia is not really true. I think behind the scenes, they both know that the biggest threat is the US, and the biggest threat is shale oil from the US that has been increasing dramatically. It has been taken over global markets, and that shale oil companies are over leveraged, and that they cannot withstand a price war like Saudi Arabia or Russia. And I think you will see maybe very soon a rearrangement of the key players in this industry, with Saudi Arabia and its OPEC partners and Russia coming out on top.
Wow, that's an interesting take. That's a very interesting take. I kind of agree with you now that you mentioned it. Like, I agree with that conspiracy theory right there, because the United States, I mean, their production per barrel is around like $50, a barrel, whereas Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, we're under $6 a barrel. So, we can afford it, but they can't over there.
Absolutely. Much, much cheaper. Yes, absolutely. Exactly. And I think the longer this goes, the more companies will go out of business. And I think the most recent article from an oil magazine that I read a few years ago basically talks about pretty much the collapse of the shale oil industry in the next few months.
Wow. That's an interesting take. Dr. D, you going to say something? Go ahead.
Well, it's because it's cutting off for me. So can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you from here.
I wanted to go back to the sustainability kind of, what do you think we should do now? I mean, do you feel like we should learn a lesson from this crisis and be able to maintain everything, and we should be localizing everything so that way we're not in a big mess like this? Or do you think we should continue business as is once this passes and continue our relationship? I'm still thinking about, because I'm like you, I forget things quickly. So I've been keeping on my mind is like, we need China. We need China. China needs us.
Yes.
We need OPEC. OPEC needs us.
Absolutely. That's globalization right there.
Exactly. We need them. They need us. But when we have these crises, we are upset because we need them, and we shouldn't be needing them.
Yeah. No, I think why not? Why we should not? I mean, we want them to need us,
Should
right?
we not come up with another?
Yeah. Well, we want to sell our beef. We want to sell our satellites. We want to sell our airplanes. This market is not big enough for all our cars and airplanes and orange juice and agriculture and wheat and soybean and everything else. So we are a big exporters here in the U.S. So that's back to Adam Smith, the wealth of nations. Nations become wealthier when they trade together, when barriers are low, when there are no tariffs, ideally, there are no quotas, there are no administrative barriers. We want to remove these barriers to trade. That's the fundamentals of free market economies, right? As a matter of fact, we've been for many, many decades now trying to push other countries to adopt free market economics. Things have changed last few years, obviously.
Yeah.
but nonetheless, I think you raise a very good point there. I don't think things are going to go back to normal. There are some lessons here. Some of these lessons we have been learning even before the coronavirus. It used to be that many companies, as far as supply chain and manufacturing and outsourcing, they were driven by cost. And they were basically bottom feeders. Where do I go where the cost is the lowest? If cost is Korea, I'm moving my production to China. When China, the cost is high, I'm moving my production to Vietnam. Now they're moving textiles to Ethiopia because that's one of the cheapest places. And I think that whole kind of mindset, thinking of reducing costs as the only driver for decision-making and how you structure your production, your supply chain, your logistics, I think is dysfunctional. And we've learned that the hard way. I don't know if you guys recall, about 10 years ago, there was an earthquake and tsunami in Japan. That has hit supply chains in the electronics industry so hard. There was a shortage in components, in microchips and things like that. And that kind of put many companies on notice that if, in fact, you only have one provider in one location and you depend on that product for your goods and services, then you are only as sustainable as that location. So should there be an earthquake or a tsunami or a fire or a strike, a labor strike, then you're out of business. So companies now started to think much more resilience, flexibility, reliability of supply chain and manufacturing and outsourcing. I mean, that's what we teach our students in supply chain management. And I think what happened with the tariffs, when tariffs were imposed on China and many companies ran out of supplies, they start looking for different providers. The same thing, the same story is continuing now. And I think what you are going to see is companies are going to be much more, I think, proactive, trying to find alternate location for manufacturing, for supplies, for R&D, for logistics. And to the degree that your network is more dispersed, spread out, I think you will see that you will be much more resilient. Bringing things back to the US, just because the US tends to be a much safer manufacturing base for American companies. And you must have certain productions here. I mean, look what happened with the masks, with ventilators. I mean, we were struggling just because we were not able to produce these. So the kind of the fundamental assumptions that cost is the key driver for supply and demand and location decision is not true. It's okay for the short term, but I think you will see now companies have sustainability in mind, have resilience in mind, have flexibility in mind, and they really need to restructure how they place manufacturing sites and operation and subsidiaries and research centers and other units to maximize, of course, effectiveness, but also for sustainability purposes. Should this unit go out of line, what can I do? Who can I call upon? And I think that kind of thinking is going into now the redesigning of, especially the multinational corporation and the large corporations, that really need to be aware that you cannot put all your eggs in one basket. Again, back to that whole discussion of diversifying your risk in terms of location, in terms of suppliers, in terms of buyers, outsourcing agents, service providers. So I hope those discussions gonna increase because you can't really count on something that has been working for you up to this date, working for you in the future.
That's a really good point about diversifying your risk. Now, for the small businesses and for, the self-employed, how can they diversify later on after the smoke clears, so to speak? What would be some good advice you could offer these people once the smoke settles down?
Ooh, that's a tough question. That is a tough question because it really depends who you're talking about and in what context, what country. I know countries like Kuwait and like other places like Qatar and others, they have a very generous social safety nets that might help in the future. In this case here, I mean, when you talk about like I said earlier, the Uber drivers and the self-employed, I mean, it's very tough. It's very tough. We have someone that not far from here, we have a restaurant. It's a couple and it's a family-owned business. I mean, if that place goes out of business, what are they going to do? They probably will have to borrow money and maybe start another business. So it's honestly on a case-by-case basis. Having said that, I think I see now a greater divide between those who can leverage technology and those who are not tech-savvy, and that goes for both individuals and organizations. Juliette was talking about the move online for education, and you see how when you are technology ready, when you're technology savvy, when you're technology enabled, make the transition easier. I think you'll see more and more jobs in that space. I mean, we're talking about places closing down, but Amazon is hiring. Streaming businesses are booming. Anything that has to do with online is doing just fine. So I think, I hate to say it, but we all should consider how technology enabled we are, and should our line of business become irrelevant, maybe they don't need professors anymore. What can we do? I mean, how can I, maybe one of the questions could be, well, how can I leverage technology to use my human capital? If I feel that I know a thing or two about international business or about international economics, how can I leverage that on a technology platform? Could I offer online training? Could I do this? I think we all need to be thinking along those lines. The way we've been doing things is not going to help us in the future. This is a wake-up call, and I think all of us need to be looking at Plan B and Plan C. And I think technology has to be a big part of that.
So you think kind of like 2008, 2009, when HR companies really started figuring out the redundancies in organizations. I'm in HR now. So it's like, once they started figuring out, okay, this is redundant, this job's redundant, let's just give all these jobs to one manager, office manager. They can be the HR professional, they can be the marketer, they can be this. Let them figure it out if they want to earn their money. Do you think this is going to happen again as like a second wave?
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, the entire HR function now has been outsourced, right? I mean, you have HR in the clouds now, ADP and the others. So, my research is on human capital, and of course, human resources is a subset of that whole discussion. But entire functions now are being put on the cloud and outsourced. And you see that happen every after crisis, where maybe the most effective way of dealing with something is give it to experts. And then you are better positioned and better able to continue providing that service than you can in times of crisis. So absolutely, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I think it is a good point, because I feel like now small companies for me, I was thinking that, okay, well, I don't need to really pay for an office space. I mean, yes, some people in this part of the world still are not into this virtual therapy, but I think that I can get them trained. In another month or two, I'm liking it. People are liking it. Why should I pay for an office space? Why should I pay for a secretary? We have an online calendar, and actually they can go on, assign. And right now I'm going to be with another app, and this app is new in Kuwait. It's going to be all for just like the US has this like help therapy or whatever it's called. Request. You see it on Facebook. It's going to be exactly like that. People can go in there. They can look at my slot, sign up, pay, and that's it. So why do I need to be, you start to think about, well, I can cut cost of 2 secretaries. I don't have to pay office space, and I don't have to pay a percentage for, the person who's with me.
Absolutely.
I start to think that. Like now I'm doing the same thing you and I before we've talked about, like a lot of colleges, they don't want to pay that manpower. They don't want to pay this big money for a tenured track professors, or having them to, even there's social securities and all this. They don't have to do that if you can get just people online. And students love online once they get the grasp of it, because it's in your house. You could do it. Go do your own thing. Go work. I think a lot more universities, maybe in the US or maybe even here, they start to think about, well, it would be cheaper for me to have online. Instead of like having you come and teach at AUK, you can teach the online classes for AUK and be there. It's cheaper for them.
Yeah,
so I think they might start thinking that way.
Yeah, I wonder honestly, as we are moving online, we had only a few weeks to move everything online, and I think the university is ready, and all the university system of Georgia are ready. But I wonder if that becomes like the goose that lays the golden egg, for many. And now, if the whole kind of high context interaction face to face that I enjoy, I've been teaching online, but for graduate classes I teach face to face, and I enjoy that. When you have these debates and these arguments and you're live, you're on the spot, you have to answer, and that allows me to see who's really up there and who needs help. And in the online, with all of these options to review and correct and revise and control what you say, if we are not losing, a big piece of what teaching and learning is all about. And I hope that universities kind of don't jump on the bandwagon, and that there is still room for that traditional face-to-face, high context, critical thinking kind of opportunities in the classroom setting.
Yeah, and I hope it doesn't become all black and white. Every time we have a crisis, everybody goes black and white.
Yeah.
So we either had all this face-to-face, and we should be, hiring people and manpower and social connection, or now we're going social distancing. Everything is virtual, and let's just keep it. I feel like as human beings, we don't know how to keep medium and be able to, even with our economy, we don't need to, now everyone's in crisis. Everyone's thinking what's the best way to sustain their businesses. So we're just going to do this now, or we're going to do that. And I hope that doesn't happen, really, to be honest.
Yeah.
And,
this, all of these online providers, I know for us as a university, there are some very big companies that provide these LMS, learning management systems online, the Moodle and the Blackboard and all of these tools. I mean, Skype and Zoom and all of us are making a killing right now. So even in this current crisis, there are a lot of companies that are doing just fine. We mentioned Amazon earlier, the streaming services, entertainment services, the online platforms, guns. Who would have thought? People waiting in line to buy guns. And I was curious.
Well, why?
Well, I'll tell you what.
Like toilet papers.
Yeah, yes.
What the hell? I mean, if you're a toilet paper company or a sanitizer, you should be dancing.
Absolutely. And I think for guns, I think they say in any time of uncertainty, just to kind of have more control of the situation, people go out and buy guns. So I saw these pictures, Google it, you see people waiting in line to buy guns here.
So, that's scary.
So even it is scary. And but the point is a lot of subsectors, specific Kimberly-Clark, they're happy now. Georgia Pacific is happy. Amazon is happy. So we have these kind of points of excellence, I guess, or lucky stars, economy. So it is not all bad. There are those who will benefit like anything else. There's always winners and losers. I personally think that Mother Earth is the number one winner. I saw this picture of dolphins in Venice for the first time. The lagoon is actually clear. We live right next to a preserve. I'm looking at the beautiful view here, trees, and we have a river downstairs here. And I never seen it so quiet and so peaceful and so full of animals. You see deers, you see birds, you see all squirrels. And I think as less and less people go out, I think nature is winning. Satellite images of pollution in China before the virus and after the virus. Google it and you see these satellite images. And it's beautiful. It's clean. And I'm sure many Chinese will probably see blue skies for the very first time in their lives. I teach in China. I travel to China. And I love going to China. I love my Chinese students. I love the university there. But that's one of the issues. Shanghai is not as bad. That's where I go. But if you go to Beijing or some of the other industrial heartlands, you see gray skies. You never see blue skies. Not to get philosophical, but maybe this is Mother Earth way of saying, take a break. I need a break myself. So stay home. So let me recover. So maybe that's what this whole thing is all about.
Yeah.
100%. Kuwait's still,
I was
Kuwait's
telling
still kind of
my
cold.
students, maybe
really good.
It is kind of cold night, but I was saying that the earth is probably detoxing,
Yes, yeah, exactly.
It's a detox, it's overpopulated, and there is a lot of damaging. So maybe it is the way the earth is detoxing itself,
Yeah. You don't want to listen to me? Well, I'll show you.
Well, yeah, exactly. We've been telling you about globalization, about warming, What do you think are the pros and cons of what we learn? Just to, I don't know how many more questions, Mahdi, you have, but this is probably my last one.
I'm all set with the questions. I think that's a good one.
Crisis.
Well, we can go on for hours. I think there are a couple of things that stick out. I think, first of all, this whole online versus brick and mortar, you probably know, guys, that, online sales was about 5-6% of total sales here in the US 10 years ago. Now they're about a fifth to a fourth. 20 to 25%. So it's tremendous. It's quadrupled. But what's been happening right now, which I think is really unfair in a way, is that those who have online distribution channels and online, the e-commerce channels will be just fine because they can continue operating. But then all these mom and pop shops, or even some of the traditional retailers like Macy's here, for example, which is for the most part is really still. You visit, you touch the product, you interact, you get advice. I think those are going to suffer. So I think one of the long-term effects maybe is that there is an acceleration of the favors toward the online platform. And I think an acceleration of the demise of the whole kind of traditional face-to-face, in-person, brick-and-mortar type of shops and shopping model. That's one. I think the other one is that was something I mentioned earlier is the whole idea of kind of redesigning supply chain. This is for companies. And I think companies are really now, after what's been happening with the tariffs, with some of the big disasters lately, and then with this one, I think companies are really now thinking carefully about disaster management, disaster planning, and you are going to see some major changes in how supply chains are structured. Some of that might entail bringing some manufacturing back here to the US, diversifying where things are made, having multiple agents, having maybe this type of contracts that call for agent A, and if agent A is enabled, agent B and C and D. So these type of contracts with different scenarios, I think, are going to be much more the template as opposed to just kind of one-off. So you're going to see some major changes, I think, in that area right there. The other one, and we've been kind of mentioning this on and off, is cultural. I think the cultural and the psychological effect of this is going to be significant. I think in the way we interact with each other, in the way we greet each other, in the way we care about each other. I mean, we're all staying home. Some of us know, for example, that it could be just a cold-like symptoms, but it's not just about me. It's about, my family. It's about my parents. It's about flattening the curve that we have been talking about over and over again. So I think, despite all of this, I think that we are going to see some major cultural changes. I think the way we deal with this, and we have to understand that something happening in some city, thousands of miles away, where bats that carry viruses infect pangolins, which is an exotic animal that is prized as a delicacy in one region, can put me at home and can put me out of my work. I think that idea, think about that for a second. Someone's culinary preferences will affect whether I'm able to do my job or not. And I think that's back to the whole idea of organization and how what happens in one country cannot be ignored. The other point, I think this is also big, and I hope we see changes here, the whole concept of healthcare. The idea that if you have money, at least in the US, I know Kuwait is very different. I lived there for 6 years, never had an issue with payment. I think it's very cheap, affordable, good quality healthcare. But I think when you look at countries like the US, which is one of the top countries when it comes to research and development in terms of means, equipment, facilities, but then you have so many people that are not covered. And the idea that certain people have access to healthcare and others don't is ridiculous. Because when you have a pandemic like this one, if everyone is not cured, we haven't gone anywhere. Because your landscaper might have it, your maid might have it, your pizza delivery guy might have it, and unless everyone has access to healthcare that guarantees well-being for everyone, the idea that some might have it have the luxury because they have money and the others don't, I think is ridiculous. And I think we've seen that here. And I hope that opens up the whole discussion about at least basic healthcare for everyone, because society is not healthy when a part of it is not healthy. And I hope we engage in those type of conversations in this country right now.
I thought Dr. D had something to say. That's why the long pause there.
Paper on resilience.
Nice.
We talk a lot of...
Yeah. I'd like to know from you, Juliette, what you think is going to be, maybe from your view, the long-term effects.
Psychologically, I think it was very interesting. Yesterday, I had somebody on one of my teletherapy. She says to me, most everyone is talking about how anxious they are about what's the future can predict, but how do I stay home? What should I do? Lack of connection. The same thing you're talking about is even the way we are interacting with people, we're scared of people. So she says to me, I'm just anxious about when we do go back, how do we interact? Are we supposed to hug again? It was like a question that caught me by surprise, because it's like what she's saying, all the things we knew, when we go back, will we know them again? Yes. And I was saying to her, that's a really interesting question, because people are going to go back. They might have different habits. They might have different way of interacting. Some people are going to go back and flexible. Yes, hug me, kiss me. And the other people are like, no, I'm still doubtful. So even companies, I don't know what you think, but I'm assuming the companies, when they go back to functioning again, they're going to have that reservation. Are we supposed to,
Oh, yes.
But also the concept of resiliency. I'm writing a paper, and what is the ingredient? For us, it's the psychological immune system. Yeah. For you guys or for companies, I wonder,
It is.
I hope everyone taps into their resilience. We need it now, financially, economically.
Yeah, that's a very interesting concept. Very interesting concept, and I bet you a lot of research is going to come up in the next year or two about this, because this is such a prime time for research to see the effect of a pandemic like this one, a major shock, global shock, on people and their psychology, on companies and their operation, on countries, and how countries deal with it too, policymakers and things like that. Yeah, very interesting.
I think we should do another show on Psyched with Dr. D and bring you on and, for the psychology segment there. And that way you guys can talk psychology and economics.
I would love that.
I think that's a great idea.
Great conversation.
That way Dr. D won't have me geeking out on these economic questions. I'm a product of Dr. Mourad. So
Thank you. It's great. Well, see, this is a good example of a successful product. There you go.
But no, I think it would be awesome to have you back on again. And,
Thank you. I can hear you, Juliet, just fine on this end.
I can hear you too.
Yes, fine.
It's because it says my brand white is, I don't know, something like that is low. Bandwidth is low. I don't know what that means.
Now that's the thing.
For a while.
That's the thing.
Anyways, before I get really
good internet.
off, I can't hear a thing.
Invest in good internet.
Thank you, Mourad.
Thank you, Juliet.
Thank you, Dr. Mourad.
What is your network bandwidth is low? I have no idea what that means. But thank you, Mourad.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. You can also find us on Instagram at The Project Kuwait. Thank you, and join us next time.